Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobhit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Intentional Product Manager podcast, where we dive deep into how to grow your career and your leadership impact. And today I'm joined with someone who's lived through not just one, but three massive industry transformations and helped shape them: SaaS, cloud infrastructure, and now enterprise AI. So please welcome Vik Chaudhary, who's VP of Product, ex Meta, MIT Lab, Oracle. He's an IPO and M&A veteran, and it's great to have him here. So Vik, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shobhit. That's a very kind introduction. I see you conveniently left out all my failures, which I always learn from, but thank you.
You've had failures? I don't believe that. But yeah, of course, we've all had failures. So before we dive into the heart of today's conversation, I just got to ask, you've worked through many tech revolutions. What was like the first big technology shift moment that you lived through? And what did it teach you?
Shobhit, I started my career like right when we were in the shift here in the San Francisco area, or more accurately down in Silicon Valley, where there was a shift happening from building packaged software and moving to SaaS. And
Hmm.
enterprise was used to buying software. They were used to having it installed, having legions of people to maintain it and pick the right upgrade paths, decide if they wanted to upgrade or not. And you just had to like build software in many, many different versions. Version control was even more of a thing back then. And SaaS in the enterprise wasn't yet a thing, and it was relegated to very simple stuff like tools to build websites, right? And then right out of my sort of MIT, you mentioned MIT lab, that was the MIT AI lab days. I moved out here from Boston and I joined this very enterprise focused company, Oracle. I was a software engineer. So you're asking about like the changes that I noticed as we went through that whole journey of like software to SaaS, right? And I was squarely in the software business at that time. Like I spent a few years engineering and building and writing software that got installed. Oracle was great for building software that could run anywhere. You built your database, it ran anywhere, any kind of machine, any kind of server, any kind of environment. But as startups were beginning to mushroom in Silicon Valley, I think it was remarkable. My first thought was how much mid-management engineering and product leadership could not look beyond what was right in front of their sight. Like right in front of their eyes, they could see it, maybe a little bit further, but they couldn't see a whole lot beyond that. And I think it's, I have some thoughts on that if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to ask you, give me an example of when they were like so like nearsighted.
So this one you can't fault them because I'd just come out of the MIT AI lab and I was like, hey guys, we should be like going into development with AI. And
Hmm.
you can imagine like 25 years ago, what heresy that was. I was just told to like stick to my knitting and like build, VAX VMS software that ran for the largest, American Express.
Hmm.
But I'll say that it was even simpler than that. There were, the enterprises that companies were selling to, like Oracle, they were very much squarely in the software space. They were intrigued by this whole SaaS idea. But in general, the enterprises themselves were very resistant to change. And they were resistant to change because there wasn't a massive threat to their businesses. And
Yeah.
because of that, the vendors, including the companies like Oracle, et cetera, they didn't have an imperative to go into the SaaS business. And yet, that in the long run, SaaS became a $1 trillion business. So about missing an opportunity, I think there are some massive companies that really missed opportunities.
Got it. Got it. That's super interesting. What else? What else did you learn through this process?
So, the first thing that I learned was the internet is massively underrated at that time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's a saying about how even though there's a new technology and you may underestimate it in the short term, you may underestimate it even further in the long term, right?
Hmm.
So, or actually, it's really about you overestimate a technology in the short run and you're really going to underestimate it in the long run. And we see about AI how that might be true today, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but I think the second thing that you have to learn, and I learned myself, is that if you're in any kind of position, doesn't matter what level you are or how many people you have reporting to you or none whatsoever, it's like you really have to decide in a technology shift, is your number one strength strategic or is it executionary? Now, of course, we all want to believe, especially product managers, that we are both, right? I mean, which product manager would say, well, I'm not strategic, I'm really about getting the work done, and vice
Hmm.
versa. But the truth is that you're like somewhere between those two extremes of being really great at strategy or really great at execution, because most days you're going to wake up and you're going to do one thing over the.
Hmm.
And so understanding that and knowing where you are in that slider is super important, because when you're making a shift like we did from software to SaaS, the industry was changing rapidly. And so if you're really great at strategy, you could figure out what is the ecosystem of partners you need to work with that do not exist today. And then
Hmm.
how do you go to market with those kinds of ecosystem partners? The Gartners don't help you as much necessarily in that kind of shift.
Yeah.
So it's really that thing. You really have to understand where are you, and could Forrester have said that, hey, Mark Benioff, go and start Salesforce because you're going to win in the whole CRM business against Siebel? They probably would have
Yeah.
deterred from doing that.
I mean, Forrester Gartner, if they could tell all these things, then they'll be starting companies themselves. So that totally makes sense to me.
Super important to understand whether you're strategic or you're execution oriented and just go towards those strengths.
Hmm.
There's opportunities in any kind of technological shift. There's opportunities to really think about where do you want to be a year, 2 years, 5 years from now? Where will the industry be? And so
Yeah.
if you're strategic, you can really think about looking around the corner and try to go towards that. On the other hand, there are great opportunities for just doing product way better than any of the incumbents could in a shift. So as we're going towards AI, there are just
Mm.
great engineers and product managers and a lot of other people that just figured out how do you build an AI-enabled user experience? How do you build a data-enabled application? What are the things you need to do in order to build that more quickly? And that's all about execution. And there's opportunities
So,
on both sides. But you
so,
really
so,
have to understand your strength and try to figure out what you need to work on every day.
so you're saying something super important, which is you can be successful and build an immensely awesome career being super strategic, being very execution oriented, as long as you're moving towards your strength. It's not that everyone needs to be strategic. Is that correct?
That is especially true when there's a big technology shift. When
Yeah.
you're on a technological shift, you don't necessarily have to do all three at the same time. You can pick what you want to be great at. You want to build a great product that is just amazing with a user experience that is taking advantage of the internet, SaaS, cloud infrastructure, and now AI.
Hmm.
Well, let's forget about building those alliances with other companies. Let's forget about figuring out, are you being paid attention to by the analyst firms. You want to go and really focus on technology being the ticket to the game and the game at the same time. And you
Hmm.
can do that really well. Alternately, you can decide that you are more of a industry product manager, an outbound product manager. You see a lot of companies nowadays having roles for inbound versus outbound product managers,
Yep.
which
Yep.
was a big learning for me because I grew up at a stage where you just had to be both. But
Ah.
if you're an outbound product, important in a technological shift, to figure out, are you a hyperscaler that is just looking to compete but build other alliances? Or if you're a startup or a smaller company, which AI hyperscalers do you really need to be able to work with and why? And do you need to work with all of
Hmm.
them, or do you need to work with the two that are really going to help you get to the next? And that's a strategy. That's more of a strategy.
That's a strategy question. Got it. Got it. What were like some of the early moments in your career when you realized that, hey, things are changing, rules are changing, and you better adapt pretty quickly?
I was really fortunate to really be here in San Francisco at I would say the beginning of I wouldn't say the startup ecosystem or the startup boom, but most certainly the software startup boom as compared to the previous generation of, the HPs of the world that were
Hmm.
really not in software, but they started from a different. And so I think one of the biggest learnings was the industry watched really carefully when a company, the lore of Silicon Valley and the story of companies like Netscape.
Hmm.
And I think the big learning from that whole time, those years of Netscape's sort of rise and fall, and Microsoft's dominance in the end, was that do not underestimate the behemoths in the industry. It's
Hmm.
very tempting today for us in the AI world, and I'm like this because I'm deep into AI right now, and I know that there are going to be great opportunities and it's not necessarily going to be in one of the big behemoth companies. It could be lots of opportunities outside. At the same time, do not underestimate the behemoths. And that's really important because if you underestimate the behemoths, what's going to happen is that you will get blindsided, or maybe you won't get blindsided, but your competitor may understand the value of being able to ally with the larger companies and use their distribution channel or their relationships to unfairly or actually fairly compete against you. So just figure out and respect the behemoths when a new technological shift comes, because they'll dive into it really quickly as well.
Tell me more, what's happening right now where people need to be careful?
Right. I mean, if you take a look at, the tremendous optimism as well as probably skepticism that we're thinking about when it comes to companies, the newer companies like OpenAI and Anthropic in the enterprise world, right? Now, the fact is that in terms of dollar value that has been taken away from the big behemoths, it is still a fraction of, say, the several $100 billion when you look at companies like Google and other organizations that are really deep into the enterprise.
Yeah.
But yet these companies have taken away maybe tens of billions of dollars of revenue away from the large companies. Now, it would be tempting to say that this is an example of the next Facebook, and they very well might be. But the fact is that the behemoths have recognized when it's time to move fast. So if you look at Google right now, as an example, they are moving tremendously fast towards the world of AI. They have multiple competing product teams that are working on AI products. They have AI teams that are separated away from their core product teams. And so they are coming out with credible products, and they're training the marketplace, and they're evangelizing it, and they have that distribution reach that GCP does. And so you can't underestimate them. Meta, which is, the alumni that I'm an alumni of Meta, and I came there from the developer data and AI. Now, at Meta today, what's happening is that there is, as everybody knows, is a group called Meta Superintelligence. But the leadership of Meta Superintelligence is not the same leadership as the rest of the product organizations at Meta. And those are being separated, and decision-making is being given to the MSL organization to be able to move as quickly as possible, to make hiring and firing decisions, to make organizational changes, to essentially build products that may not necessarily be approved by the rest of the product organization. And those are the kinds of startup-oriented ways in which big behemoths are acting, and they are likely to pay off.
It's amazing. And I love the example you're giving, especially of Meta, where they realize they have really structured the organization around the need to move fast here and taken away all these layers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can I make a comment on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So, the whole saying of Zuck that was move fast and break things, right?
Yeah.
And the goal of all Meta teams, since I worked there for a few years, has been to move as quickly as possible at all times. And they do this with a bottoms-up culture, which enables product managers and engineers and designers and researchers to essentially experiment, to be able to go and launch something. The company does tens of thousands of software commits every single day that go into production. At the time I was there, it was about 25,000 software commits that were going into production every single day. So that company is already moving fast, and faster than many of the players outside. So imagine with that kind of structure, are they able to make the same kind of speed in AI? Well, it's well known right now that Llama, for example, isn't going through the same fast iteration as the other models, foundational models in the industry. Quen is releasing, from China, is releasing fundamental foundational models that do agentic AI. They can take control of your computer and click on everything and fill out forms and do stuff and do incident management and create documents and do it all this autonomously while you sleep. So those companies are moving faster, and yet Meta is not able to move quite as fast. So the real issue is, why is a culture, and this is a real product management question when you go into a technological shift, even if your culture was moving fast, or if your culture was moving intelligently in the enterprise, or if your culture was moving with building deep sales and distribution moats, when you come to AI and there's a technological shift, you may not have the skills to move as quickly as you thought you could. And that's really important to understand, because the rules have changed, the product has changed, the foundation has changed, the competitors are changing. And you may be flat-footed if your organizational structure and you as a person in product, in engineering, and in design, any of these disciplines doesn't recognize that you have to fundamentally operate differently.
I love it. Actually, let's keep talking about that, because that, we were going to discuss it, that as there's a massive wave with AI, and you've been right at the center of it. How should product management leadership respond differently than like a normal phase of growth?
So you asked specifically about how do product management leadership respond differently in such an environment.
Yes,
That's a
exactly.
great question because it comes back to really fundamentally understanding that the people and skills that brought you to this point of success or wherever your business is may not all necessarily be the people that are going to take you for the next era in this industry. But yet you've got tremendous bench of talent over here. So number one, I would say, and we've had to do this previously at Meta, as well as in some other organizations I'm a part of since, which is flatten the structure. And so start operating in a way that brings you as a leader as much information as possible from the front line. And so an example of that might be creating a product manager role. Let's say you're an enterprise organization and you're building products for sort of mid-market and enterprises. The important thing there in an early technological shift is that your product is actually being used by customers and you can understand and see what their pain points are directly. Now, in a traditional product management organization, you might abstract that away to the sales engineers, to the solution engineers, and get the information back in research as quickly as possible on surveys and so on. But in an AI world or a technological shift, you might want to create a role for a product manager that is a hybrid between engineering work and being a forward deployed engineer. Get them out and break this rule about, well, we have inbound and we have outbound product managers, as I see happening in the Valley today in some of the older companies.
Yeah.
So that's a change you can make. I would say flatten the structure as quickly as possible. That also means that if you are a VP or a director, senior director, sort of leadership positions in product management, make sure that you've got some ICs reporting to you and bring those ICs, hire as experienced people as you can or as smart people as you can in those roles. And they should be at the same footing as the next manager or director on your team. And that's super important because they are the ones that are forward deployed. They're pushing the front lines. And if you wait for leadership in the middle to translate for you, you might be missing what's going on.
Yeah. I really love what you're saying because it's sort of, for me, it explains the other side of things. So I've been looking at the changes that are happening with flattening of organizations and super ICs, if you will, and whatnot from a candidate's perspective. People seeing the changes in the job market and the company structure. And you're giving me a leadership point of view on why the technological shift dictates those sort of change, and it sort of completes the picture for me. Where do most product managers and leaders get things wrong during these massive technological shifts?
So when you're talking about product managers and leaders, of course, it depends whether you're in a startup or you're in a mid-sized business or you're in a large behemoth, right? But let's for a moment say that startups are going to operate like all startups do. And so they don't have a problem. They see an opportunity, they'll build for it, and their goal is to be able to create value as quickly as possible. So I don't worry about it. What I worry about is the mid-sized SaaS companies, mid-sized infra companies, the sort of the larger companies that think that they move really fast and they're well organized in different departments. And so what I feel like their leaders are getting wrong during that time is that they underestimate the power of the bureaucracy within their organizations. And so there is a clear recognition today that AI is an area that companies have to be able to focus on and build new products. No doubt. AI teams are being formed. There are vice presidents of AI that are AI products that are hiring new teams. They're bringing in new people in the organizations and opportunity. Yet the bureaucracy, and I don't mean administrative bureaucracy, it is a cadence of the business that may sometimes slow them down. And so typically the PM leaders, what they get wrong is they feel like alignment is the way they did alignment before is the way they need to do alignment now. And so the same rules of putting together the PRDs and the presentations and going up and down the chain and sharing information and figuring out what your strategic goals are in department A and see if that we can do a map to that and then move forward to the next level. Those are the ways. So alignment is what the organizations typically get wrong. Because guess what? Your most nimble competitor that is outside there doesn't have to do any of the stuff that is slowing them. And all they are focusing on is their product, their customers, their prospects, and maybe industry alliances that are going to get them to move faster. So the first thing is that in terms of alignment, you have to change the mindset in a technological transformation that changes the alignment from mostly internal, like 90% internal and maybe 10% external, to being like 20% internal and 80% external. And so if you can get alignment with the technology providers, like the foundational model developers or the vendors that you're working with, if you can get alignment with the partners that are going to bring you into new AI-enabled projects, you are going to be operating in the same cadence as the best equipped startups that are doing that anyway.
Love it. Love it. Maybe I might ask you for an example here. So like, you led developer infrastructure AI platforms for engineers at Meta. That's what, 70,000 engineers or so?
Yes, that's correct.
So maybe can you share a story about that instance where you had to rethink strategy fast? Because again, the technology landscape is changing right under your feet.
Right. So I can give you a really great story which sort of illustrates the opportunities as well as some of the challenges that we face as product managers when you're coming in a technology. So the context was at that time in this organization at Meta, which was a developer data and AI infrastructure organization. It was a total of about 3,000 engineers or so that were building tools for internal developers, machine learning engineers, data scientists, and also to some extent some of the external developers that are building on top of open source tools. Now, our mission, all the way from the leadership, Zuck, down to the executive VPs and the VPs in the organization, was very much go fast with AI. And this was back in 2020, 2021, which was even before ChatGPT was released to the world, because there was a lot of AI that was being used at places. And we did that. We started working on building tools that were taking the business from solving problems that traditional software engineers that were building sort of procedural code would be doing, to moving towards the people that were building AI-enabled applications. Like the feed needed to be, the Instagram Reels needed to be competitive with TikTok. You needed to use AI for that. And there were machine learning engineers and data scientists and data engineers that were operating on data and thinking in very different. So everybody understood this, and that was crystal clear. There was no ambiguity in that, and things were great. They were moving in the right direction. Our products had roughly 50,000 monthly active users within the organization that were developers, machine learning engineers, data scientists. Yet when it came to a vision and prioritization, one of the tenets that product management leadership put out there, and I advocated for this, which was, in addition to building AI products or augmenting the role of the developer by using AI, it's really important for us culturally as an organization to use AI ourselves. And it was remarkable in retrospect and hindsight how the organization didn't see that opportunity. Now, fast forward 4 years now, and if you asked any developer organization, were they looking at using AI tools to augment the productivity of their organization? The answer is absolutely yes, right? Like, it's unthinkable for most organizations, unless they're highly regulated, that they wouldn't be looking at some sort of augmentation using any of these AI development tools out there that can help. But at that time, it was almost as if from engineering, it was seen as product management. You're trying to sort of dictate the kinds, how we do our work, and that's not really productive, right? So let's focus on the things we agreed on, which is impact, enabling customers, and that's the most important thing. And I do not disagree, those are the most important. And yet in a technological shift, it is also really important that you experience and feel and understand the power of the technology, because if you can actually experience the power and the pain of using a new technology, you will understand as an engineer, as a product manager, as a user experience researcher, as a designer, you will understand how to build it better for your company. And that you can't abstract away. You can't outsource that. You can't read that from articles. You can't listen to podcasts and figure it out. You actually have to use it.
That is so important, what you're saying here. Like that visceral feel for what's the customer's problem, what's the experience of using the product. You can't get it secondhand. That's fundamental.
Absolutely.
Now, with that, I'm going to transition us a little bit to more like career management and learning aspects. A lot of the listeners in the podcast, they're always thinking about how do they move their career forward and how do they adapt to the changing times. So, Vic, you had talked about not letting the org chart define your role, of finding your strengths and playing to that. But tell me more, like how what does that mean in practice? And there is a term that's being thrown around quite a bit, like full stack PM. So
Mm.
what does it take today to become a true full stack PM that's indispensable?
Shobhit, I really love that term, full stack PM. And it's not because uh, I've got hankering for something that's similar to the full stack engineer,
Yeah.
which of course I've always envied. That's like what a great term that is. As
Hmm.
a product manager, maybe it kind of harkens back to a earlier time when product management was really sort of coming into its own and becoming as important as the engineering organization and engineering roles. And in that time, the reason you even had to have a product manager as opposed to everybody else just kind of managing without them is because you needed somebody who not only understood what were the opportunities and challenges in building the product, but also figuring out what does it take to make it successful out there in the marketplace. And if it's a PLG product, then it's understanding the PLG motion, experimentation, analytics, and all of that. And if it's an enterprise product, it's understanding uh, deal sizes, sales impedances, solution engineering challenges that enterprises face, compliance and regulation. So you really have to, as what I think of as a full stack product manager, is a person that knows how to build a product and how to influence the marketing of that product and how to make the product so much easier to sell that it almost turns the salespeople into order takers. And if you can get to that level, then you are truly a full stack product manager, and you have to understand each of these phases really well and what skills you need. You asked about becoming indispensable, and depends very much in the stage of the organization. But since we're talking about this uber focus on a technological shift, to become indispensable here, I used to say that technology is a ticket into the game, but it is not the game itself. And I learned that through the SaaS days as we were building great technology, but we also needed to think about distribution and think about how will customers buy and what about the competitors that they typically buy from and so on. But with a technological shift, what has really happened is that technology is the ticket to the game and is really important ticket into that game. It has to be a ticket that sort of gets you to the luxury seats quickly in the front row so that you are visible before everybody else is. And so to become really indispensable in a technological shift, number one, it's absolutely crucial to figure out how could you use this technology shift that is happening? How could you use that fundamental core technology that is changing the way businesses are operating and figure out how do you build a product that finds all of those gaps? So I think product building in a technological shift is incredibly important, and it is probably underrated by the more experienced people, maybe even like me, who think, well, there's all that full stack stuff, and what about the marketing and what about the sales? But you gotta nail the product first. It's so important. At the same time, I'll say if you want to become indispensable, you can't be indispensable just to the product and engineering and delivery organization. You have to be indispensable to the organization that finds the most pain, that feels the pain of the customer. And when you're working in an enterprise product role, the people who feel the pain every day are the ones that are calling, they are on the phones, they're on those demos, they're sweating the objections. They're facing customers that are saying, well, but I could hire people to do this. Doesn't Google or AWS or OpenAI do that? And so that's what you really have to understand. And if you can empathize and make the life of those people much easier, focus on sales impedances, you can bake the sales impedance solving back into the engineering organization. You can make the entire organization of engineering and product absolutely indispensable to the success.
This is really, really good to hear, because sometimes I hear the other side of things where it's almost like the needs of sales are an inconvenience to the product manager who wants to build out their amazing vision and roadmap and don't want to be bothered by such things. So it's really great to hear you talk about how this actually makes you completely indispensable and like a very, very critical part of the organization.
And Shobit, I think, thank you for asking this question, because I think it comes back to that first question you asked. And when I said, don't underestimate the behemoths.
Hmm.
And so the reason, again, it is really important to be indispensable is because you know that in this industry, the behemoths are moving fast, and they have the unfair advantage of distribution and
Yeah.
credibility that you don't have yet. Even though, Andreessen or Lightspeed gave your company $150 million for having, 2 million in revenue, you still haven't built that credibility. When you sell to Starbucks or American Express or Chase or FedEx or any of those companies far away from the West Coast, except Starbucks, I guess, that's a very different culture. And I could talk about how those cultures move in a way that make you rethink the salability of your product.
Yeah, love it. So let me ask more of a career advice question. Again, like a lot of the people listening are product managers who are trying to figure out how to move forward in their career. So if someone's listening mid-career, feels like, they're just not like accelerating, kind of stuck, what's a bold move that they could make right now?
Yeah, that's a really important question for all of us in product management as to like what's next. Like, how do I grow personally? How do we build the right career trajectory, and where do you want? And I'll say that in my own, just personally speaking, in my own product management career, it's never been a straight line, and it has helped me tremendously. And I'll explain what I mean by not a straight line in a minute. But it has also hurt me in terms of not being the right person for a particular role, perhaps at the right time in my career. So it's very important to really understand what's happening now and what can you do with it. So let me illustrate by example. I'll say when I was in my 20s, mid 20s, I was really keen, after doing engineering for like 5 years and maybe a couple of years of product management. I was like, look, I can be a manager of people. And I remember I was working for a Oracle spin out, not literally, but people from Oracle that were running a database company that later on got acquired by a private equity company and then sold to OpenText. And so I went to the VP of engineering and products, and I let them know that I was really interested in being a manager. And they're like, Vik, do you really want that? I mean, you're doing so well in what you're doing. Management is like, it sounds great, but honestly, it's like a real pain sometimes. And you won't be doing all this great work that you are today. You'll be working through people. So are you ready for that? And I was, and then, became a manager in my 20s, and I decided to go down that path. And of course, for a decade or 2 decades later, that has always been considered the way you advance in your career and get more responsibility, enable others, and work through them, support them, coach them, solve their problems. And in that multiplicative way, you can have a impact on the organization. And that, of course, is a great way for product managers to go forward. But there are two challenges. One is, unless you're working in a very, very large organization that has tons of resources, the opportunities for management at these different levels keeps narrowing. And so you have to either leave and go somewhere else and get that management experience, or you have to start your own company. And of course, you can do any of those things, but those are sort of discontinuous. Today, in times of like AI technological shift, I feel there's a different path to growth that product managers have accessible to. And that different path to growth is a redefinition of the product management role. And it goes back to the question that we talked about previously about how do you become indispensable. So think about, don't be hemmed in by the role of a product manager, whatever that definition is in your organization. Think about how you're going to add value really quickly. And it may not be somebody's job. And if that's something that can roll back into the product organization, maybe it's becoming a forward deployed engineer at the same time as being a product manager. Maybe it is helping the sales organization. Maybe it's helping marketing, whatever that is. Maybe it's actually vibe coding along with the designers on your team so that you could actually demonstrate a prototype faster. Those are the ways in which you will grow and expand your skills. And that will make you more valuable for that next role that someone wants you to take. And it may not be a management role. It may be a senior IC role that is reporting to the CEO on special projects. I just talked to somebody at Google who I had last met with, who he was not a manager. And today He's still not a manager, but he's reporting to a president of the GCP organization and working on very strategic projects. And his path has been non-traditional. It didn't go
Yeah.
through layers of management, and he's doing some really amazing stuff. And I say, look for
Uh,
opportunities like that.
I,
I've
I,
taken it
I,
myself one time in my career. It really helped.
I want to repeat two things you said because I think they were really critical. One is like, do not fall for the traditional definition of the role when you could be doing something that's even more important. That's like not quote unquote supposed to fall within that role. Learn to
That's right.
expand it, learn to shape it. And then I think second part you were referring to is like, I've heard this talked about entrepreneurs. They love to solve problems that they know how to solve.
Mm.
But sometimes you gotta go beyond that and like probably the problem that you really need to solve, you have no clue how to solve it. And you need to build the skill sets and understanding of how to solve it. And I think that's very relates to what you were saying about product managers. And maybe you need to wipe code and maybe you need to do all these things that you might not know how to do yet in order to get it to the next level.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I'd call that product expansion.
Product
And it's an
expansion.
expansion of the product role, but it's also product helping the expansion of the company or the organization that you're.
Love it. Vic, we talked about excelling in this role. Let's talk a bit more about corporate level impact and executive trajectory. So, one of the myths out there is if I execute well enough, I'll naturally rise to leadership. And you said that's not enough. So, for somebody who's looking to get into the executive ranks and really needs to figure out what does corporate level impact look like, how should they think about their career and getting to that level?
I really love talking about impact because the meaning of impact is so different for so many people. And there was a time, and going back to the previous question you had about product and product expansion that we talked about, I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote. I'd worked for a startup, and that startup was then sold to a private equity firm, as I mentioned, and then to OpenText. And that same CEO of that company then went and built the next business. That company was called Keynote, and that was also acquired by Thoma Bravo. Went IPO, was acquired by Thoma Bravo, and then rolled into a company called Dynatrace. And when that CEO asked me to join the organization, he said, "Vik, I know you've been, head of product, director of product, and you run these teams. I don't have a product role for you. I've got a great product management organization, but I've got a great job, and I think it'll be the MBA you never got. So, do you want it?" I was like, "All right, let's talk about it." And he said, "We really need to think about expansion at the corporate level. And where we are today is here, and where we want to go is sort of unclear. And there's all this technological shifts happening in our organization. There's like this cloud infra thing coming up. We're a SaaS business. Where do we go from here in order to like meet that challenge?" And so it's like a part strategist, it's part M&A banker, and it's a part product advisory role. But you're going to be a lone person on this, and you'll be the change agent that we need in this organization. So frankly, at a role level, I was going to go several levels down to become an IC once again. And I took that job in a heartbeat. And I did it because there was a direct line of sight to corporate impact. And the corporate impact I learned were issues that were about the rate or pace at which revenue was growing or not growing in the organization. The business divisions and the product divisions that were doing well and the ones that were not, and were facing competitors that were outside the walls who were doing a lot better. And then because by that time, a couple of years later, the company had done a secondary public offering and was now kind of operating as a public company, it was really important to deliver that bottom line EPS, which is based on EBITDA every quarter. And so there was that short-term pressure every time to keep performing and being profitable. And growth and profitability, growth of revenue and profitability are sometimes very opposing levers. And it's very hard for product managers to kind of think about those things. They can think about revenue and maybe they can think about profitability, but simultaneously trying to figure out like how do you build products that are moving one or two of these corporate levers is a hard job. So impact at the corporate level usually has to do with revenue metrics, EBITDA metrics, or I might say, and nowadays in the technological shift, and that technological vision that is far-reaching and looking around the corner, so that you give credibility and a safe space for those institutional investors that are coming in and investing money into your business as a public company, or if you're a private company, for the venture capitalists and private equity firms and other firms that are taking your word for this massive amount of growth. So that's the backdrop. And if you are a product manager today and you're not understanding those conversations that are happening in the boardroom, make friends with the people that are. Go for lunch with a finance guy, and talk to the woman who's leading marketing and trying to figure out how are you changing the brand of the company. Talk to not just the salespeople, but maybe talk to some of the operational folks in the organization that are dealing with these minute issues for them every day of accounts payable and accounts receivables and deal sizes and the multiplicity of contracts for a large enterprise organization and how it slows things down. Think of all of those things and really draw that line, which is not a straight line, between your product, impedances, the marketing, the profitability, and then try to find a place that you can actually make impact in the product organization.
Love it. No, it's a much broader point of view and perspective, and closer to what's happening at the corporate level.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very
Love
true.
it.
I'll say that, on a personal note, I did say, though, that sometimes it takes a leap of faith as a product manager, because there are very tried and true ways of improving your career profile. You can be a career product manager and just do things in one way, and you'll do great if you stayed with that organization for long enough. But sometimes if you take on different roles, like I took on a role of corporate development, I did that for several years. And then I got the opportunity to run products and corporate development and then run marketing as an executive in the organization. I still have executive recruiters sometimes who reach out to me and say, Vik, you look like you have this great experience, and you could do this chief product officer role somewhere, or you could be a VP of product somewhere. But hey, that corp dev experience that you have on your LinkedIn, maybe you should remove that. And maybe the marketing experience that you have, maybe you should take that off there, because that's not what they're looking for. And I'll say that they're missing that it's really important to have all these multiplicity of experiences, engineering and product and marketing and sales, whatever it is. Because if you want to make a corporate impact, you want to walk in the shoes of all the people that you're working with. And there's no better way to do that than actually doing it.
That's worth underlining. Another common theme I see product managers, both, junior, senior, all the way level up, is they're hesitant to leverage non-product management title experiences in their career story, while sometimes those are actually more important than some of their product manager experiences. So I want to underscore that point. That's really critical, what you just said.
Yeah, sure. But that's very, very true. Absolutely true. And what you just said is so important, because it works. And the reason is that there's a compensation structure that works. If you stay at a Meta and you're a product manager, you don't want to go and do other roles. You won't be necessarily in the front runner to become that VP of product one day. Well, maybe not. When Zuck wakes up and says, we've got to be number one in AI, and who are the people that actually understand how to do this? He is going to bring in research, somebody who came into the research background and a product management background and an ML engineering background, and that person will be best equipped to lead that organization. Guess what? There is somebody like that reporting to Zuck today, who came from Scale AI to do exactly that.
Vik, thank you first of all for everything. This was totally packed with insight and a lot of career wisdom. So first of all, just thank you for making time for the podcast and for appearing on it.
Thank you so much, Shobhit. This was so much fun and really insightful questions that made me think. So I appreciate that.
And I'm sure our listeners want to learn more. So where can they follow your work and learn more from you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Vik Chaudhary, VIK. And I also have a website called vikchaudhary.com. Very predictable. So
perfect.
Please do check it out. And my DMs are open. Happy to help anyone, especially product managers, aspiring product managers, and especially college students, because you're capable of so much today. And so many college students are doing great. And I'd just be happy to help anyone that wants to start out in this.
Love it. I'm sure people will appreciate it. We'll be sure to, in the show notes, we'll leave all those links so it's easily accessible for you. And then for everyone listening, if you enjoyed this, if you got a value out of this episode, please just share it with a product manager friend. That's how we grow. That's how we spread the word. Appreciate you listening. Thank you, Vik, and thank you everyone who's listening today, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Shobhit.
Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.